Lady C destroys Meghan's Archie and Lilibet story with one document, and suddenly the silence isn't just silence anymore. It feels like something pressing down, something deliberate, something that has been sitting in plain sight for 6 long years while everyone pretended not to notice what was quietly refusing to go away.
Family, which would show a level of spite and malice that is truly not only because she doesn't have the humility, and it's humility that was every royal birth except for that has been close to the line of success.
One sentence, one document. That's all it would take. Not a complicated investigation, not some dramatic confession, not even a prolonged explanation, just one clean, undeniable confirmation. And yet 6 years have passed and that moment has never come. That's where this story begins to feel less like gossip and more like a pattern that refuses to break. Because here's the thing no one can comfortably explain away. When something is false, especially inside the royal world, it gets shut down immediately, cleanly, efficiently, without hesitation. That's how it has always worked. So why didn't it happen here? Why did the silence stretch and stretch and stretch until the silence itself started sounding louder than any accusation? Because now it's not just random voices asking questions. It's careful voices, measured voices, people who have spent decades protecting their credibility suddenly stepping into a conversation that by all logic should have died years ago. But it didn't die. It evolved. It sharpened. It started connecting dots that were always there but never aligned quite so clearly until now. And at the center of it all sits something so simple it almost feels absurd: timeline. Dates, basic, unarguable biology. You can't give birth after you've already given birth. That's not opinion, that's not speculation, that's fact. And once that enters the conversation, everything else starts to feel fragile.
Would have ran a story about her belly when it hardly looked more than normal, for Christ's sakes. Now, what's especially odd is
most royal controversies follow a script. They explode, they trend, they get addressed or buried, and then they disappear into history. That's the cycle. Predictable, reliable, safe. But this one broke the pattern. Instead of fading, it kept resurfacing, louder each time, sharper each time. And when a story refuses to follow the normal life cycle, the real question isn't what's being said, it's why it won't stop being said. Because if the answer were simple, it would already be over. If the explanation were solid, it would have already been delivered.
First in the world to be all over the so-called moon bump theory when it comes to...
But it hasn't. And that absence is where the tension lives. Because you can challenge a rumor, you can dismantle a claim, you can discredit a source, but you can't argue with math. You can't smooth over dates that don't align. You can't silence arithmetic. And when multiple independent voices that don't coordinate, don't conspire, don't benefit from chaos, all arrive at the same uncomfortable conclusion, it stops looking like coincidence. It starts looking like something else, something structural, something that doesn't bend no matter how many times it's examined. Baseless rumors need fuel. They need exaggeration. They need momentum.
Party, and Lady C, you've got a prop today.
Oh my God. Dan!
But this has something far more dangerous: consistency, quiet analysis, repetition without collapse. And that's where it becomes impossible to ignore what's sitting underneath it all. History. Nearly 300 years of royal protocol built specifically to prevent this exact kind of uncertainty. Every birth witnessed, every detail confirmed, not as tradition, but as protection. Because once upon a time, doubt nearly destroyed everything. And the monarchy made sure it would never happen again. Until now. Because when Archie arrived, something shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, subtly, but unmistakably. The process that had never been questioned simply didn't happen. And then it happened again with Lilibet. 2 moments, 2 deviations, 2 gaps where certainty should have been automatic. And suddenly, what should have been routine became undefined. That's the moment the story stopped being dismissible.
Onto the baby bump watch bandwagon. But indulge us a little bit here, her mom's Dory.
Because 1 deviation might be coincidence, 2 becomes pattern. And patterns inside institutions like this don't stay hidden. They echo, they ripple, they demand explanation. But no explanation came. And into that vacuum steps someone who refused to let it settle, Lady Colin Campbell. Not adjusting, not retreating, not softening. For years, she said the same thing, with the same confidence, while the other side remained silent. And here's where it gets even more unsettling. backpedaling. She isn't claiming mystery. She isn't spinning theories. She's pointing to something far more uncomfortable. The solution has always been there.
She was also furious about the whole surrogacy business and all of this stuff.
One document, one confirmation. The exact same process every other royal birth followed without resistance. The exit door has been open from the very beginning, and yet no one has walked through it. Not once, not in 6 years. And that's the detail that refuses to settle. Because when the answer is that simple, the refusal to give it stops feeling accidental. It starts feeling intentional. It starts raising a different kind of question, not what happened, but why the answer is still being withheld. Because silence over time changes shape. It stops being protection. It starts becoming evidence. And just when you think the story can't deepen any further, another voice enters the frame. Careful, measured, reluctant. A man whose entire reputation depends on precision. Hugo Vickers. Not loud, not reckless, but willing, just willing enough to acknowledge that something about this doesn't sit right. And when someone like that steps into a conversation like this, even cautiously,
just making sure that those children have the best possible grounding. And I reckon that will pay off big time in the long run.
Everything shifts because now it's no longer one voice pushing a narrative. It's multiple perspectives, different approaches, all circling the same unresolved core. And once that happens, the story stops being something you can ignore. It becomes something you have to sit with, something you have to question, something that refuses to close. And the most uncomfortable part? The answer has been simple from the beginning. So simple, it almost feels impossible. One sentence, one document, 6 years, and still nothing. And this is where the story stops pretending to be just about timelines and documents and quietly shifts into something far more personal, far more fragile. Because the silence surrounding these births does not exist in isolation. It sits right next to a public image that was built on the exact opposite promise. Transparency, honesty, saying the difficult thing no one else would say. That was the brand. That was the identity, carefully constructed, repeated, reinforced through interviews, documentaries, speeches, an entire narrative built on the idea that nothing would be hidden anymore. And for a while, people believed it. They leaned into it. They trusted it. But the problem with building your entire identity around truth is that the moment you choose silence on the one question people cannot ignore, that silence doesn't disappear into the background. It becomes the contradiction that starts unraveling everything else. Because here's what no one says out loud, but everyone quietly notices. Consistency is what keeps a narrative alive. The moment consistency breaks, everything starts to feel staged. And over time, observers, careful ones, patient ones began noticing something else. The appearances didn't quite land the same. The chemistry didn't quite feel effortless. The moments that were meant to look natural started looking practiced. And when you step back far enough, those small, almost invisible cracks begin forming a pattern that is impossible to unsee. Not one moment, not one awkward exchange. A slow, gradual shift that suggests something deeper is pressing underneath the surface. Because pressure always shows. It doesn't explode immediately. It leaks. It builds. It reshapes behavior in subtle ways before it ever becomes obvious. And according to multiple observers who have followed this story closely, that pressure has been there for a long time. Not necessarily caused by this single controversy, but undeniably amplified by it. Because unresolved questions don't sit quietly in the background. They grow heavier over time, especially when they intersect with public identity, reputation, and a life that depends on maintaining control over perception. And then there's the pattern that's even harder to ignore. Project after project launched with anticipation, each one positioned as the next defining moment, each one expected to solidify relevance and authority. But something kept happening. The impact didn't hold. The attention didn't sustain. And with every cycle, the response became slightly cooler, slightly more skeptical, not dramatic rejection, something quieter, something more dangerous, indifference slowly replacing curiosity. And in that environment, the need for something stronger, something more emotionally compelling becomes almost inevitable. That's where the focus shifts. Not dramatically, not explicitly, but subtly, steadily toward the one element that guarantees attention. Children, Archie and Lilibet, not as individuals, but as emotional anchors in a narrative that needs to stay alive. Because unlike projects or platforms, they cannot be replaced. They cannot be rebranded. They are permanent. And that permanence carries a kind of power that nothing else can replicate. But here's the part that makes everything feel even more complicated. If those children are now central to maintaining relevance, then the decision to leave the most basic facts about them unresolved starts to look less like oversight and more like something else entirely, because a definitive answer would end everything. Completely, instantly, no more speculation, no more recurring waves of attention, no more serious voices entering the conversation, just silence. Final, permanent silence. And in a world where attention is currency, ending a story completely means losing everything that story continues to generate. So the question shifts again, not what is being hidden, but whether the absence of clarity itself has become the mechanism keeping the entire narrative alive. And underneath all of this, there's a truth that feels heavier the longer you sit with it. Because beyond the strategy, beyond the speculation, beyond the endless analysis, there are two children growing up in the middle of something they never chose. Every year that passes without resolution adds another layer to a story that will eventually reach them. They will hear it, they will read it, they will question it. And when that moment comes, the answer they receive will matter more than any public narrative ever could. Because for them, this will never be gossip. It will be personal. That's why Lady Colin Campbell calls it a running sore. Not a scandal that peaked and disappeared, but something unresolved that continues to reopen again and again because nothing has ever been done to close it properly. And history has already shown that time doesn't fix questions like this. Silence doesn't resolve them. It only stretches them until they become impossible to contain, which brings everything back to the same quiet, devastating simplicity that started it all. One sentence, one document, the same confirmation every other royal birth produced without hesitation. Still available, still possible, still untouched. And after 6 years of that choice being made over and over again, the question no longer sits in the shadows. It stands in plain sight, louder than ever, waiting for something that still hasn't come. At what point does the silence stop protecting anything at all and start revealing exactly what it was meant to hide?